You've heard plenty about the sport rorts scandal enveloping former Sports Minister and current Deputy Nationals leader Bridget McKenzie. It hinges on an Auditor General's report that suggests the Minister's office allocated sports grants in the lead-up to the election with base electoral politics in mind. Hold the presses. There wouldn't be one voter in the country surprised by this. It's exactly what we've come to expect from our politicians. But that doesn't mean it's right, of course. Most of us are just jaded by this sort of thing, bored with the cynicism of it, and frankly amazed that politicians seem to think we can't see through it. And if you want proof of this, just look at how ineffective this sort of pork barrelling has been. Here's Georgina Downer, then only a candidate, mind you, a Liberal candidate, not an MP, handing over a big cheque to the Yankalilla Bowling Club in the Adelaide Hills. They didn't even invite the local MP, independent Rebecca Sharkey. The point is, of course, that Downer lost. The cheque didn't work. Sharkey is still the MP, and the people of the lovely little town of Yankalilla are grateful for the money. Likewise, in Sydney's Mosman, the rowing club pocketed $500,000, but it did nothing to save Tony Abbott. Olympian skier Zali Steggall took that seat, and she might even take up rowing herself, given she thinks we're about to be swamped by rising oceans. So, as often as not, the grants don't work, at least politically, and so they should surprise nobody. This confirms one of my rules of politics, that anything politicians do that looks party political is rendered largely ineffective. Voters want competent action, policies and priorities they support, not partisan politicking. Voters smell politicking and, of course, we turn up our noses. Anyway, on my reading of the Auditor General's report and what went on, McKenzie is guilty of little more than politics as usual, and she should survive, although Labor, quite rightly, will probe and test all of this when Parliament resumes. But the bigger point here is how governments of all descriptions treat us and our money as their own. A federal government seeking to repair the budget shouldn't be involved in this sort of funding, especially at an electorate-by-electorate level. It's so tacky. Sports clubs should get grants from local government and from state governments, and they do, of course. Most of the time, Canberra ought to stay right out of that sort of local funding. But Canberra also doles out cash under the Stronger Communities program, where $150,000 is distributed in small grants in every electorate across the nation. I mean, where does this stuff end? There are handouts from local, state and federal governments. How about politicians just stop spending so much of our money for their political ends and leave us with more of our own money because we know best just how we'd like to spend it? Now, let me talk about the latest interventions of the bankers and business leaders on climate change. This is an area where I think we need to be very wary indeed, because business leaders like to use shareholders' money to virtue signal. They can make exorbitant profits and take obscene salaries, but then proclaim their moral superiority by using other people's money to support woke causes. And that's been confirmed again today with the release of a survey of global business leaders showing they reckon they need to think about their social licence and not just their company's fundamentals. The climate debate is so illogical that companies the left are usually highly suspicious of, I'm talking here about insurance companies, are suddenly treated with little scepticism, in fact, wide-eyed enthusiasm when they use climate change to justify higher premiums, for instance. Today, the Bank of International Settlements, it's a kind of umbrella group for central banks around the world, has issued this report called the Green Swan that warns about the economic consequences of climate change. It warns of climate risks in this quote. These include what we call green swan risks, potentially extremely financially disruptive events that could be behind the next systemic financial crisis. Scary words indeed. Now, this report has been used today by activists, the usual suspects, of course, to warn of doom and gloom for the planet. But there are a couple of crucial points to make here when you delve into what the report really says. First, I've had a look through the report and found no reference at all to the many benefits from climate change. That gives the game away. Anyone who knows anything about the science knows that there will be benefits. Higher agricultural production, for instance, in some areas, and better living conditions and fewer deaths from the cold in others. The downside might outweigh the benefits, but you shouldn't ignore the benefits. This report, like so many others, ignores this and pretends that global warming delivers only doom and chaos. Second, when you read this report, and you do it carefully, the real financial and economic risks are not so much from climate events as from climate policies. It's about how companies and banks are exposed to the risks of unpredictable government policies and what they can do to profits and therefore to asset values. We all know about that, don't we? And their preferred solution in this report is a global carbon price and some kind of unspecified wealth redistribution measures. So there you go. Another dire warning about climate change, or just more climate policy advocacy?